John, let me ask you, I mean, you have a lot of life experience, right? You're 83, you've done a
Yeah,
lot of different things, had a lot of different roles. Do you think transitions ever stop?
I hope not. I mean, I think the last transition is going to be really interesting.
That's one we're all gonna have, right?
Exactly. I thought a lot about this because as I've gotten older, my death has become a daily companion.
Sure.
I put my arm, okay, let's go. We got another day. What do you think about that? Let's go. But I'm
That's
convinced
very
that,
healthy, by the way, John. That's
well,
very healthy to have death as a daily companion.
yeah, we'll see. But in Polish, zobaczymy, we shall see. But I'm convinced that the fear of change is actually rooted in our fear of the one, like whenever there's change, it's like a grief situation. We're losing something.
Right.
And I think those small losses in life are reminders without us realizing of the loss of life. So they're reminders that one day there's going to be a change coming, that we're not going to come back from that. Maybe
Right.
there's something on the other side of that. Who knows?
I'm Art Blanchford, and this is Life in Transition, a podcast about making the most of the changes we're given. As a married father of 3 teenagers, a longtime global business executive and adventurer, I've been through hundreds of transitions in my life. Many have been difficult, but all have led to a depth and richness I could never have imagined. You'll get to hear all about them on this podcast so that together we can create more love and joy in our lives, no matter what transitions we are going through. Welcome back to Life in Transition podcast, and I'm super excited to have a very interesting man with me today, John Scherer, all-around Renaissance man, and everything from magician and pastor to Navy combat officer, founder of an organizational behavior science, and author and founder of Leadership Development Intensive, which is now has graduates in over 55 countries. And I also did back during the pandemic and really made a big difference to me. So I'm really thrilled to have the founder of that work with me today on Life in Transition. Dr. John Scherer, welcome to Life in Transition podcast.
Great to be here, Art. I've been looking forward to this ever since we talked about it. So
Awesome.
ready to go.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to jump right in then, John. And I know a little bit about your story from when we did LDI and you spoke to us in the LDI class and also from our pre-interview. But what would you consider of all the transitions you've had in your life? What would you consider at this moment like the most impactful, the most meaningful? Maybe it was the most difficult, but something that had the biggest impact on your life. What would you consider of all the transitions you've been through that really comes
My
to the surface right now?
gosh, this is. I told you it's going to be a hard question because I feel like the wandering Aramean that just wanders around through life over my whole life. I think I'm just going to pick one. In 2007, after I gave that speech in Poland, and the woman back there that had a leadership training company in Krakow, Poland, basically invited me to come to Poland to work with her clients. And I was 68 years old. So that was whatever, how many years ago that was. And I knew 3 people and 3 words in Polish. And I said to her, I'll come for 6 months. Well, I ended up staying for 16 years. I just came back last year
Wow.
to live in Seattle. So both of those transitions, the decision to go to Eastern Europe, I didn't know I was going to do it at the time. I thought I was going to go for 6 months and come back. But the decision to go there and stay there because they needed what I was bringing so
Right.
desperately. And then after 16 years of handing off what I knew, passing on what I knew before I pass on as a grandparent, I came back. I don't know which one was harder because my inner circle, in a way, is still back there in Eastern Europe.
So let's set the stage just for a minute,
Yeah.
so we're all level set. You're 68 years old.
Not now. I'm 83
No,
now, but I
no,
was
you're
68
83.
in that moment. Yeah.
At that
In that
point,
moment, I
when
was
you made this
68.
transition, you're 68 years old.
Yeah.
You have this great work and training that you're really passionate about, this leadership development intensive. Someone, when you're making a speech in Poland, invites you to come to Poland. You're living on the West Coast of the United States. You're 68 years old, where most people think at that age, sort of your contribution is over,
I'm done.
right?
I'm done. Yeah. Ready to
You could
quit.
be
Yeah.
retired, you're 68 years old,
Yeah.
and you decide to pick up and move to Poland, and then you ended
Yeah.
up for 6 months and then ended up staying there 16 years.
That's exactly right.
This sounds awful to say, but this is the word that comes to me. What possessed you to do that? Like, what gave you the courage? What was the
Yeah.
inspiration? Like, that's a very unusual transition to make at 68
Yeah.
years old to move to an Eastern European country, a second
Yeah.
world nation, if we'd call it at the time anyway,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
What drove you? What pulled you? What
sure,
called
sure.
you?
That's a great question. I mean, the short answer is I felt called. We'll come back to that in a second. But I remember somebody some years ago telling me that 60 was the new 40. So I figured, okay, I'm 48.
Okay.
I still have some tread left on the tires. That was one thing. I didn't feel like an old guy. So
Right.
first of all, and so I felt like I was still able to get out on the field and play fairly well. I could play well enough, you know.
Right.
And
Right.
and then the other thing is I know what it means to be called, to have that sense of I can't, I have to do this. Not like
Mhm.
a negative thing, but no, this is the tectonic plates of my soul shifting and there's some truth emerging here. It just felt like the absolutely right thing to do. So I did it. People talk about me having courage or something like that, but if you've been called, it's not about courage. It
But
would,
let's talk a little bit more about that because I think in religious aspects, people talk about callings a fair amount. People don't
sure.
talk about that so much in the rest of society. But what
Yeah.
does that mean to be called? Because I think it's
Well,
something that maybe we're all looking for, but I don't know if we'd recognize it if we got the call.
yeah.
So what does
Well,
that mean to
well,
be called? How does that show up in your life?
Well, let me tell you the metaphor for me. In the small towns, it's true in Eastern Europe as well as America, when there's not enough budget to have a standing police and fire department, they have volunteers. And so when the
Sure.
siren goes off, everybody hears the siren,
Right?
but only a few hear it as a call to action.
Right. Right.
So,
Right.
I mean, with all the noise in the world that's going on, some people hear it as a call to teach, or the call to serve, or the call to go into government, or the call to go in the military, the call to go in the priesthood, or the call to do whatever. Some people hear it as a call. And I remember after 9/11, I was in the Bahamas with my daughter Emma. I was doing a seminar down there and I invited her to come along. She was like a teenager. And anyway, it was great. And we were on a dive boat. We took some time off. We were to go scuba diving. And I remember putting on my gear in the back of the boat. And there were three couples there who were first responders from the 9/11 crisis. The
Oh,
city of New
wow.
York thanked them by giving them a vacation package. And so we got to talking, and I said, guys, some of them were former Navy, so we had a connection. And so I said, look, I don't want to go over stuff you don't want to go over, but I'd love you to tell me about the moments when you saw the towers get hit. I'm going to get
Mm,
emotional now.
That's all
And
right.
every one of them said, yeah, well, I saw it on TV or I got a call from the station or whatever. Everyone had that moment when they heard or saw. And I said, what happened next? And they said, I grabbed my gear and I started toward the tower. So I don't know how to explain that. If you've never been called, you don't understand. But those guys were called. Okay.
Mm,
You know,
mm.
they didn't have a choice. I mean, they had a choice.
Right. Right.
They made that choice before,
Right, a long time ago.
you
They
know.
prepared themselves for that call,
Yeah, and
and then when they get
I spent 4 years as a combat officer on a US Navy destroyer, and unfortunately, I was on the East Coast and not the West Coast because it was during the Vietnam War, and if I'd been on the West Coast, I would have been in country and stuff like that. So, but I mean, I made that decision once. I raised my right hand. I
right?
swear to
Yeah,
defend the Constitution of all enemies, foreign and domestic. And so I would, if I had to put my life on the line, which I had to do a couple times, not in combat, but other situations, I did it. No
right,
question asked. All right, this
right.
has to be done. Let's go. Let's do it.
So calling is clearly something that you don't weigh the risk of. It's
No.
something you feel strongly
Yeah.
that is yours to do, and it's a pull from
Yeah.
the heart or the soul or the spirit or whatever you
Yeah.
want to
All
say,
of the above.
and it
Yep.
doesn't have anything to do with what the outcome
Yep.
might be. It's yours to do, and it's
Yep.
something that
Yep.
you've prepared yourself, maybe even haven't prepared yourself for, but somewhere in you there was a decision made that this is what you're going to do,
Yeah.
regardless of what it is.
I think it was Bo Jackson, anyway, of American football player, who said something along these lines: "When your name is called, you got to stand up," or something like that.
Hmm.
And that's kind of the street way of saying it. But I heard my name called, so it's like, okay,
Right.
I'm in. I'm
Right.
in.
Interesting. So that's what drove you to Poland. It was just like you knew, and I'm guessing being your life and being a pastor in the past and as passionate as you are and as touch with your heart as you are,
Yeah.
that probably wasn't the first time you'd been called, but so you recognized it. Like this is something that is meant for me to do.
Yes,
No
that's
question.
exactly right. Yep. Yep.
Okay.
I don't usually talk about this, but because it sounds a little woo woo, but I was in the Navy. People say, well, when did you decide to go into the ministry? I come from 5 generations of Lutheran pastors on my
Oh
father's
wow.
side. So I'm John Jacob Scherer the fourth, right? And my father
Wow.
was the third. He was the first one in 4 generations to make the decision not to be a pastor. He decided to be a newspaper man slash alcoholic back in those days.
All right.
But I remember on
Those
my
two went
ship,
together.
I remember coming back to Norfolk we were out on an operation coming back to port, and I had about 6 months left in the Navy and trying to figure what I want to do. The captain wanted me to extend and become a admiral or whatever. He thought I had leadership ability. And I was sitting in my stateroom, very quiet, nobody else around. And I heard a voice, Art, as clear as a freaking bell, just as if your voice, and it said, John, be with people at the level of their deepest need. I was an air controller, so I remember thinking, say again over, you know.
Right, right. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
and
Yeah.
John, be with people at the level of their deepest need. And I remember writing it down. I wish I could find that yellow pad because I knew this was significant information. So then I thought, well, deepest need, what? And so I wrote down all the jobs that I knew about that did that. I had teacher, social worker, doctor, Boy
Responder,
Scout,
yeah.
YMCA, all just anybody that I had known. And I wrote pastor down there. And I looked at that list and I thought, pastor, because my grandfather, I grew up in the parsonage of his church first 5 years of my
Right.
life. My pop was
Okay.
off somewhere as a newspaper man in Washington, D.C. I was living in Richmond. My mom was with my pop and she visited from time to time. So my first 5 years, I grew up literally in the building attached to the church.
Right, right,
I
living with your
played, I
grandfather.
played in the church. So the church wasn't
Right,
some foreign, strange thing to me.
right,
It was the world where I learned to swim. I learned to swim in that
right.
pool kind of thing. Yeah.
When you saw that line on the list, which is, I mean, a great way if you think about, like, what is it that you get this calling, and
I
then what are
couldn't
the
think of
things you can
anything any
do,
higher. I couldn't think of any
right?
calling any higher than that. So I said, okay, I'm going to go to seminary. And I just gotten engaged to a runner up in the Miss America pageant, by the way. And so Sandy was great. She said, okay, let's do this. I'm in
Wow,
with you.
wow.
Yeah. And so I went to seminary. I felt like a kid in a candy store. I just loved it. Then I
Mm.
discovered that the institutional church is like any other organization. They're
Any other human organization, right?
exactly. Absolutely. And I loved it. I had my intern year in Norfolk, Virginia, where I was on the street at night with my collar and I'd shoot pool, nurse a beer, and did crisis counseling with people in bars. It was called a bar ministry. Went back, and then my first call was to Cornell University to be the associate pastor there and the Lutheran chaplain at Cornell. And I did that for 4 years. Then I was called into this work of applied behavioral science. I knew that I was supposed to be doing this work. So actually, people say, why'd you leave the ministry? And I'll say, well, let's wait till this workshop is over and then let's have that conversation. And so they'll come up at the end and go, oh, I get it. Like after the LDI, oh,
Right,
I get
right.
it, John. So I use God language because I figure that's what they want me to say. See, yeah, this is where God wants me to be doing this. And I believe that if I go into that framework, which that's not my natural framework, but yeah, okay. And they go, I get it. I'm called to be doing what I'm doing now.
So let me ask you a question that I'm personally curious about, John, in this. When you got called to the ministry, and then when you got called out of the ministry to go into applied behavioral organizational science, if you will,
Yeah.
how did you, because you were also married at this time, did you have
Yeah.
children yet when you were moving out of the ministry?
Yeah. I had at that time two kids. And then I had
Two kids.
two kids
And
after that.
I'm guessing just by the age and the time that was, you were probably also the primary breadwinner for
Yep.
your family.
Yeah. That's
So
exactly right. Yeah.
So, because this is a question I think about a lot. So, you made these decisions based on callings. How did you reconcile your financial responsibility? What was your financial plan or not at those times? Or did you just say, I know, I trust God that it's going to work out and
Well,
I know this is what I'm supposed to be doing?
fortunately, each time I had a partner who said, let's do it, John. I'm in.
Mm,
I'm in.
mm,
So it wasn't easy, but I don't think I ever was in a situation where there was pressure to be rich or wealthy.
hmm.
I just wanted enough.
Right.
And I remember I started a company and Kath and I just had our first child. So it was my child number three. We created the first computer scored organizational survey. And the technology was paper tape. This is like 1980, paper tape.
Right.
And
Yep.
it was brilliant. We just didn't know how to create a business with it. So
Right.
we were upside down. And I remember calling all my advisors together, my accountant and lawyers and stuff like that, friends. And they all said, John, don't go bankrupt. Just hunker down. So we canceled everything. I remember I was so embarrassed. I said to Kath, because we'd only been married a couple of years at that point, I'm so sorry and all that. She said, no, let's do this. I don't know how she did it, but she would call the phone company and say, hey, we can only pay you $5 this month. It was embarrassing. It was embarrassing, Art, to be as good as I believe I was in my field. I was already fairly well respected and recognized in my field and written a couple books and all that stuff. But there I was, broke. And so there's something about being broke where we canceled everything that it got down to what's really necessary. On our ship, we had a thing called the strip ship bill, which meant if we were sinking, what do we throw over first?
Right. Right.
And actually, it was guns and ammunition. You'd think you'd hang
Yeah.
on
And
to
those are
that. No,
heavy
no,
and
no,
you
no,
don't need those if
no.
you're going down.
No, it's
Yep.
really heavy and we don't need it. What are your priorities? And so when Kath and I did that, it was a really beautiful exercise in, okay, what's really important to us right now?
Right.
So
Okay.
it's really
Okay.
fabulous.
So by having that calling and that calling being so strong and not questioning it, it was just clear like, hey, we need to keep going on this. What do we need to get in line to be
Yeah.
able to keep going on
And I
this?
think, Art, the other thing was I'd had a lot of experience with transitions. When I went into the Navy, I was also an intelligence officer on a small ship. You have lots of jobs. And so I had to be investigated all the way back in my childhood. And so one of the
Right,
things I had to
right.
do, they wanted to know every address where I'd ever lived.
And then gonna go talk to all your
I,
neighbors.
I called my mother and I said, "Hey, mom, I need help." I was 21 years old. There were 19 addresses, Art.
Mm, I
I
did that
moved
same process for the
I moved
Navy, and I had
19
I had
times.
16.
See?
In
So
20 years, I had
so you
16.
and I learned how to get into a situation, join quickly, and leave if we had to.
Yeah,
And so I hate to say it, I wish I hadn't had all that. My kids lived in the same house for like 25 years or what, first for all
right.
their life. Actually, Kath is still in the house, so there's this
There's
base.
still a home base there,
I
right,
never had that.
right,
Yeah.
which is really powerful. I have not either. So I wanna come back to this transition to Poland because, like I said, there's been a lot that you've been through. But in following this call, and I think it's also fantastic. I mean, 68 years old, when a lot of people are thinking about hanging it up, putting their boots up on the rack, and you're heading off to a country that you didn't speak any language, you
No.
didn't really have any connections other than the business and the invitation from somebody speaking
Yep.
something prophetic into your life that you heard as the call.
Yep.
What transpired and what did you learn? And I mean, obviously, you were going to go for 6 months and you stayed 16 years. So something happened there. But what did you learn from that transition, from that process of following that call?
That's a lesson I'd learned many times before, actually. In a way, Art, it wasn't anything new. It was one of the biggest, most risky when I look back on it. It was a huge at the time. I'm just very zen in that moment. Chop wood, carry water. What's the next phone? Do the next thing with total presence. And pretty soon I've been there for 6 months. I went there in August of 2008. Okay.
Hmm.
2 months later, October, or 3 months later,
Global,
America's economy turned upside.
global
Nobody was
financial
hiring
crisis,
leadership consultants. I had
right?
colleagues here in America that were bankrupt and devastated. I'm running like a mad dog in a meat house in Eastern Europe. The phone's ringing off the hook because what I realized is they really needed what I represented, which is how do we turn freedom into effectiveness? The wall
Right,
came down in
right,
89. So there'd been 15 years or so of them figuring
right,
out how to have a country. If the Russian party, if the Communist Party isn't telling us to do what to do all the time, what do we do with this freedom? How do we make decisions? And there I was with this background in applied behavioral science, culture change, leadership development. And so people were just so hungry for what I had to offer, I couldn't leave.
right,
I felt like St. Paul got the message, go to Macedonia.
right,
I can imagine him saying, Macedonia, you got to be freaking kidding me.
right,
Macedonia?
right.
That's nowhere, man. You sure you don't need me somewhere else? But I was just so welcomed. And that there was such a, well, I mean, it's getting emotional thinking about the people. I'm still friends with some of the CEOs and the clients that I met there
Wow,
that wanted me to work
wow.
with their people. Yeah.
Wow. So it wasn't a new experience for you, but it was something, and then it also seemed at some point it was also serendipitous. I mean, that
Well, it was
you had
advantageous,
work to do when everybody else is shut down over here. If
Art,
you had stayed
from a
here, you would have been shut
financial
down. You
point of
wouldn't have been
view.
helping people or earning money.
Exactly. From a financial point of view, there was more risk in staying. I didn't realize it at the time because nothing fell apart till I was over there. But then I saw what was happening and I was very grateful that I was in that situation where I couldn't do any more work. So I started training people, colleagues that were really interested. John, I want to be like you. Yannick, I want to be like you when I grow up. Okay. All right. So I just started helping people learn, take them on projects. That's how I learned from some of the
And it was that the genesis of LDI, or was LDI already running
No, the
before
LDI
then?
came about when a Dutch client in 1987, 2 years before the wall came down in Eastern Europe, a Dutch client asked me to do some work with one of his executives on a one-on-one basis. So Bert van Dijk, I can say his name because he's given me permission. But Bert came to Spokane, Washington, where I was living, and I brought my little team together, had a yoga teacher and a nutrition. It was a body, mind, spirit experience. And I put all of my Gestalt there. I was a Gestalt therapist, so I put all that stuff together. And he came for 4 days and he goes back. And the next day I get a phone call from the CEO, Ichak Van. They make Mentos mints. That's the company. And he
Ah,
said,
okay, okay.
John, what did you do to Barrett? And I went, oh, geez. And he said, I got a guy in Brazil I want to send. So he
Oh, it's
started
good. I thought
sending.
you were worried he's not gonna pay you. What did you do to him? I'm not paying for that
Exactly.
visit.
He said, I got a new man here, John. I don't know how you did it, but it's wonderful. I got a guy in Brazil. So he started sending his country managers from Belgium, Germany, England, Brazil, America. He sent one at a time with their spouse or partner to Spokane, Washington for this 4 day program. And then Aetna Insurance Company stumbled across it. And the guy who was in charge of leadership development for Aetna, Bill McKendry. And on the last day, he said, John, how many of these can you do in a month? And I said, I don't know about. So I asked my team, I said, we could do 2 a month. He said, okay, stand by. So Aetna sent 100 of their executives, one at a time, Art, with
Wow.
their spouse over the next 2 or 3 years. That became, it was called I had to name it something because I remember telling the guy from Aetna, it's not a program, Bill. It's just, he said, John, if you're doing what you're doing, it's a freaking program. Okay. So I said, all right. So I got to call it something. I call it the Executive Development Intensive. It was a solo program. My whole
Right.
team worked with that executive couple or alone for 4 days. One of the women wasn't in a relationship. And I said, well, who do you process your life with? And she said, my twin sister. I said, bring her. So,
Bring her with you. Yeah. So when I did LDI, that was then
okay.
called, or ELDI.
Well, actually, what happened, Art, is, and they wanted their teams to have the experience. So they said to me over time, can you do a group version? And I said, I would love to do a group version. So I then started doing group versions, which is one you took and called the leadership,
Well,
the
but that's
LDI.
what I was gonna say, because I did mine during the pandemic, it was just me and my wife.
Yeah. Well, see, that was the
So I
EDI.
did it in the original format in a sense, right?
Absolutely.
It was just me and my wife at the
Exactly.
time.
You had the original format.
Yeah, interesting, interesting. Wow, so that's where that came from. Again, it
Yeah.
was being pulled out of you, like, people are asking you to
Exactly.
for support and how can
Yeah.
you serve?
I mean, I really can't take credit for most of the things that I've invented or created because it was always in response to some need from the world. I did video stuff on VHS videotapes in the late 1970s, early 1980s, and sent videos to actually GTE, the phone company. They did something. I was one of the first people to use video based training and stuff like that, and the first survey, online survey, and that kind of thing. But it was just called, once again, it was something that was needed. I was a lifeguard. I was a swimmer when I was young. And so I was a lifeguard in the summers and waterfront director at YMCA camp and stuff like that. So when people were struggling, I'd swim out and help them. And that's been the metaphor for my whole life. I went to Poland and they were struggling, and I swam and helped as many people as I could. And I taught other people how to be a lifeguard, how to
So,
swim out.
John, using that metaphor, like, if you're a lifeguard, you position yourself by the pool, right?
Exactly.
So how did you position yourself? How did you show up in order that this needs called to you? Where were you sitting when someone said, "Hey, we need this help?" Or what were you doing? How were you making yourself available to what people needed?
When I was a pastor, when I was a senior pastor, my associate pastor, Gary LaCroix, one time asked me, John, people come to you for counseling all the time. How can I get people to come to me for counseling? And I said, I was doing a Zen koan. I said, well, Gary, you know how to catch a rabbit? Hide in a bush and make a noise like a carrot. And he said, people, when they see me, they don't see a carrot. And I said, maybe not. So the other thing is, I get on an elevator, Art, with somebody when I lived in Seattle on the 17th floor in a condo, and meet somebody, say, hey, how are you doing? And they start telling me, well, my wife has cancer, my dog died, or whatever. Ever since I've been a teenager, people talk to me about their problems. I don't understand. In fact, the XO on my ship came up to me one day and he said, Mr. Scherer, what are we running here? A ship or a psychiatric clinic? And I said, well, XO,
There's a little bit of both.
it's, you know, so I don't know the answer to that question, Art, but I think we're going to find what we're looking for. And I think if you sell shoes when you're walking down the street, guess what you notice? If you sell hats, if you sell haircuts, it's like we see what we want to help fix.
Right, right. That's a good point. I love that angle on it. Like, we see what we want to help fix. Not we see the problem or we see what we want to have or we see what we want to help fix. I mean, I'm processing that right
Yeah,
now
that's a big
for
one.
myself. Like, okay, wow,
That's a
yeah, we
big
see
one.
what we want to help fix, right?
Exactly, exactly. What kind of situations do you notice? This webinar or this interview, this is a manifestation of some need that you're responding to in the world.
Right,
You
right.
know,
Yeah, I mean, I think in this case, for authentic conversations about
see?
primarily midlife transition, there's a lot of people get to a certain level of success doing what they think they should and then
Yep.
asking themselves, then what?
Yep.
Right.
There's a
And
great saying that when a pickpocket approaches a holy man or a holy woman, all he notices are pockets.
that's right.
So when people walk up to us, walk up to other people, what do they notice? People notice what they're trained to fix. They notice what they
Right.
need, what they want.
Maybe also what their gift is, right? What it
Absolutely.
is they're calling, what's being called forth in them, what's being brought forth.
Exactly. What
So,
am I to do with this situation that's been put in front of me?
right.
And the
Yeah.
answer may
Or
be thank you, good luck. I hope you work it out.
yeah, it could be. What am I called to do in this situation, in this moment? Michael Singer talks about that. Do you know Michael Singer?
I do know his work. Yeah,
Yeah.
but say the quote because he has a couple of
Yeah,
good
no,
ones.
he just, I mean, he says that the only purpose in life is to respond to the moment that's in front of us clearly,
That's
without
it.
all of our blockages, without all of our shit, without all of our triggers,
Chop wood,
right? To
carry
be able
water,
to be
do the
present to
next
the
thing
moment.
with, yep, do the next thing in
And
front of you with 100% presence. That's it.
right.
110,
Yeah.
110%
Yeah.
presence.
If it's John Scherer is 110, right? No, that's really good. I'm thinking about, like coming back on this big transition to Poland, so now 16 years ago, would you have done anything differently?
Boy, I don't know, Art. I don't think so. I
If
remember
you look
somebody.
back now and you can talk to
Yeah, great
your
question.
young 60, 68, 67-year-old self, what would you tell him? Would you do anything differently?
I,
What
I, I
advice would
would
you give
say,
him?
I would say, way to go, John.
Awesome.
Good on you,
Awesome.
man. You didn't back down. You didn't find a way to avoid this call.
Awesome.
Yeah, way to go.
That's awesome. That's
Something like
awesome.
that. Yeah,
The teacher at Hoffman this week, he told me, he said, in every situation, you want to be thinking about, hey, I like this me,
yeah, yeah. I
right?
want to
I
be.
like this
Yeah,
me.
I want to be that guy. I want to be the
Right.
guy that does this. I want to be the guy
Right.
that does that. Afterward, I don't think about it. It's really funny. It feels automatic. It's kind of like falling in love. You don't make a decision to fall in love. Okay, Greek and Hebrew. There's two different views on the world: the Greek language and the Hebrew language. So the Greek works with abstract nouns. Hebrew works with verbs. I lean toward the Hebraic model. Everything is happening in that language fix. So when we meet somebody, we start gathering data. We meet as Greeks: height,
Right.
weight, how they look, how they
Yeah.
talk,
We put him in a box
all
right away,
yeah, with
like
all the
everybody. Right.
categories, education, whatever's important to us. And so we're getting to know them out there, separate from us.
Yep.
And at some point, we begin to know them in the Hebraic or biblical sense of the word. In fact, the verb to know in Hebrew is the same verb to have sex.
Oh, wow.
He knew his wife and then they had a child. I mean, that's how it works. So then it's suddenly the Greek knowing out there becomes relationship. And we can only know people in the Hebraic world, in the biblical world. We get to know people in relationships. Scientists say, no, 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 don't get emotionally involved because it'll mess up your data. And the biblical world says, no, 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 that data is interesting, but you get to know who they really are only in relationship with them. And so I
Yeah.
think in life, we move from the Greek to the Hebrew. And that gap for me is sometimes, like in this case, instantaneous.
Right. Right.
I knew I had to go and be in relationship with these people.
Right. No, that makes sense. John, if you look back now too, what would your life be like if you hadn't followed that call?
I've thought of this many times. When I first came to Seattle, so it would have been 2004, 2005, somewhere in there. I had an invitation to speak to Tatra Motors in India. It's like the
Okay.
General
Yeah.
Motors of Asia. And I was invited to go and give a keynote presentation to the top 1,000 people in their global organization
Of
about
Tata.
leadership
Yeah. Wow.
development.
And that organization is huge. I mean, there's automotive, but it's the whole
Oh,
family, right? They have
it's
a
a family
conglomerate.
of global companies, and I was
I mean,
invited
they have
to be
tea and
one of
they
a
have
handful.
excavating and they have consulting
Exactly,
services.
exactly. And the date of that presentation fell on the same date that I had promised to do a presentation in Seattle to a small group of HR, about 25 HR people. Any one of my colleagues could have given that talk here. So I went to the woman who was invited, and I said, I'm really sorry, but I'm not going to be able to make that date because I've been invited to do this thing. You can understand. She was really kind of difficult person for me. And she said, yeah. And she said, you just came here. I'll blackball. You'll never work again in Seattle if you don't keep your word. And so I made the decision, Art, to not go to India, but to stay here and do a freaking workshop for 25 HR people that any one of my colleagues could have given in order to not violate my word. Now, a week later, I got the invitation to go to Poland. You
Mm.
see, what if, what if, what if?
I guess in that situation, looking back, you could have gone to India.
Well, if I'd gone to India, none of what I've done in Poland would have happened. Something else would have happened.
Oh, okay, but
You know,
not that.
somebody asked me once a year or so ago, do you have any regrets? That's a great question. I think it's a question that you'd be very at home with in your
Right.
interview. And I couldn't think of many regrets because when I look, I mean, there's some things that like this. Do I regret not going to India? Absolutely not. At the time,
Right.
I was so pissed off that I had to make that choice, and I had to make it on based on my not on my sense of integrity, but on her sense of integrity.
Right. Right.
I thought she was crazy.
You said it would be something else. Have you imagined? I mean, if you hadn't said yes to that call to go to Poland, the path that your life would have taken, how would it be different today?
Well, I would probably have found other people who were interested in what I had to offer. But when people are thirsty and you have a backpack full of water, it's not hard to feel like you made the right decision to be somewhere.
Do
I
you
never
feel like
second
if you
guessed.
look at like I look at you, you're 83 years old, still on fire, still passionate, going, healthy. Do you feel your energy would be the same today if you hadn't made that call?
Boy, I
Like if
don't
you had
know.
stayed.
I don't know. See, I come alive in the presence of other people and their reality. When people share their real world with me, I come alive. Like right now, I didn't make any preparation. You and I had this talk. And when I think about what faith is, it's not believing in some assertions about some people that lived a long time ago. It's about something that happens now, right now in this moment. It's like going with the flow. I'm kind of a Zen Lutheran, I guess, just
Oh,
because I said, well, Art's going to ask you questions and you just respond. I didn't want to plan.
yeah,
I had
and
no
for
desire.
this, it's better not to. I mean,
I just
authentic
mess it up.
conversations
Yeah.
have their
I
own
think if
juice.
we, if we were the CEO of everything, we would fuck it up. Pardon my French. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe need to be more planned. So, I mean, bottom line is your life would have taken a different turn. You're
Yeah.
really glad that you answered that call, though. That's the
Yeah.
fact. I mean, that
Yeah.
this was a call, you answered it without a lot of rationality.
No.
And one of the obvious things was that the US shut down for a while in your
Yeah.
business field, and
Yeah.
you were going full bore,
Yeah.
which both has a mission, purpose,
Yeah.
calling impact where you're helping people that need help because
Yeah.
they were still willing to pay for that, and your business kept going. So it
Yeah.
had a financial impact as well that you
Exactly.
could like, there's no way you could have
Exactly.
rationally seen at that point.
And it's not true for other people, but I was single because Kath and I had split a few years before, still very good friends. We just knew we weren't supposed to be living together anymore. The kids were gone. They were all off on their things. So it was only up. So I was the only one that was engaged in that. So that made it easier as well.
So, John, let me ask you, I mean, you have a lot of life experience, right? You're 83, you've done a
Yeah.
lot of different things, had a lot of different roles. Do you think transitions ever stop?
I hope not. I mean, I think the last transition is going to be really interesting. I think
That's one we're all gonna have, right?
exactly. I thought a lot about this because as I've gotten older, my death has become a daily companion.
Sure.
I put my arm, okay, let's go. We got another day. What do you think about that? Let's go. But I'm
That's
convinced
very
that,
healthy, by the way, John. That's
well,
very healthy to have death as a daily companion.
yeah, we'll see. But in Polish, zobaczymy, we shall see. But I'm convinced that the fear of change is actually rooted in our fear of the one, like whenever there's change, it's like a grief situation. We're losing something.
Right.
And I think those small losses in life are reminders without us realizing of the loss of life. So they're reminders that one day there's going to be a change coming, that we're not going to come back from that. Maybe
Right.
there's something on the other side of that. Who knows? I'm not planning on it. We need another seminar to tell you about. I think I was given a glimpse of that other side. But basically, this is it.
It's it for this body for sure.
Yeah,
Right. For this
this is
life,
it.
for this lifetime, or
Either
whatever you
either
want to
this
call
is
it.
it
That's
for
for
this
sure.
time around or this is it forever. I don't care. This is what's
Right.
been given to me. I'm going to live every day as fully as I can. I remember
Well,
when my mom had her cancer, we arranged one of the rooms to be like we had a hospital bed, oxygen and everything in there. And every morning I'd get up to train. I was training for marathons, get up at 4:30 or 5. And finally I was right outside of her room. Kath and I were sleeping on a futon on the living room floor. And every day I would wake up and put on my running gear and go in quietly and hear her breathing. And I'd go, hot damn, another day.
another day.
It occurred to me in that moment that we should all wake up every day and go, hot damn, another day.
Another day. That's right. I think you talked about that at some point there's going to be a transition we don't come back from. Like that's the end of our life. But the fact is, we're actually dying each day.
Yeah, every
That
day.
day is
Yeah.
dead,
The
right? So if
cells
we,
every 7
it,
years. I'm only 7 years. People say, how old are you? Well, point to
yeah,
something.
7 years,
I don't know how old, maybe 6. There's a whole bunch of cells there. Maybe one of them's brand new, came yesterday.
right? But each day, that day, we don't get to relive,
No.
right? So we've died. Like the way that I used to think about it, and I think a lot of people think about it is, oh, at the end of our life, we lose our life.
Yeah.
No, actually, we lose our life every day.
Yeah.
And so how do I want to be
Yeah.
investing my life? How do I want to be using
Yeah.
that life? Because this is the only day I get to have today. It's actually gone. So we can have a little funeral for myself,
Absolutely.
for
Well,
the day
Luther,
self.
yeah, Luther said we should be baptized every morning when we wake up, we get another day. The hardest thing for me is like I was a swimmer in college. I swam the 200-meter butterfly and the 200-meter individual medley, and I've been running marathons and stuff like that. The hardest thing for me to accept that I'm losing is some of my physical capacity to do
Right.
stuff. And a couple of years ago, I got a hitch in my sciatic, something running down this right leg, and I couldn't run anymore. So in Seattle here, there's a pool 5 minutes away. So I'm swimming again. And last week, for the first time, I swam 25 meters of butterfly from end to end without needing to get the heart lung machine halfway down the pool. And so I did 4 lengths of butterfly, but spaced out over my 1 hour of swimming. But to be back in the water again, I do a lot of dolphin kicks and stuff, which is really good for my hip and my leg. So I'm learning to compensate, but boy, it's hard not to just dive in the pool and rip off a 200-meter IM, or something like that. But gently surrender the things of youth.
Right. Right. But there's still a lot of other things, and you're still moving and you're still taking care of
Yeah.
yourself. And that really counts.
My mother was a direct descendant of Daniel Boone's brother, William. Her name was Mary Boone. Okay.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, her maiden name. And so I'm a direct descendant of the Boone family tradition. So on the one hand, I have this pioneer, this American pioneer. He said whenever he could see the smoke from three fireplaces, it was time to move, right? Because he was always
Too
on the
populated.
he
Yeah,
wanted to
I
be
can
on
relate to
the
that. Yeah.
edge of everything, right? So I have that pioneer DNA, and I have this five or six generations of Lutheran pastors who were attending to the spiritual needs of the community. And so these have come together in me. So when I feel emotional again. When I go to Poland, that's my Daniel Boone.
Yeah. You're on the frontier
Time to
and you've got a
go.
calling and people need you
Time
and
to move,
right?
sweetheart. I'm out. I'll see you later. I'm coming back. I'll be back in a minute.
Yeah, interesting. How did that choice, that transition, that answering that call to go to Poland, how did that affect relationships broadly in your life?
Well, that was the hard one. I mean, I had an inner circle, I would say. Everybody has an inner circle. The
Absolutely.
social psychologists say we can handle about 12 people at a very intimate level. So when we meet a new person, somebody has to drop. It's not like quite like that, but you can't keep adding people. And so I had this really close inner circle that I didn't realize the impact it was going to have on that.
Right. By being 6,000 miles away or
Because, like I
8,000
said, I
miles away.
went to Krakow, Poland, where I knew three people in 3 words. But I meet people quickly. Like when I moved back to West Seattle, my team back in Poland said, Yannick, you're going to be on a first name basis with half the people in a matter of days. So I meet people easily and quickly. But right now, after 16 years, my emotional circle is still back there. So I'm actually living between the worlds right now. And it's a very
Sure.
uncomfortable thing for me. When I landed in the apartment here, I still had email addresses for the people that I've been staying in touch with. So I thought I'm going to have a let's welcome John back to Seattle party. But I had to throw my own party because
Sure.
nobody. And so I did. And I just was honest. I said, hey, I'm throwing a let's welcome John back to Seattle party. I hope you can come at my apartment here downstairs in the social room. So I sent out 25 invitations. 20 people responded. I think some of them might be dead. I have to remember. A lot of my buddies I've served with in the Navy are gone now. And so, but 20 people showed up. And we had a really late, I showed slides about Poland. I had a friend here from Poland, and she was able to talk to them about what it was like for real, not just one of John's stories. And it was just lovely. And then they went back to their lives.
That's
It
right.
was really beautiful. John, we're so glad you're here. And then they went back to their lives.
Absolutely.
So I'm like, I'm here. I'm sitting here.
When I lived
I'm
overseas,
looking at the mountains and the water. I'm looking at West Seattle, this little community where I can walk everywhere. I don't need a car. I haven't had a car
beautiful.
for 15 years. It's a beautiful place to live. And I have not reconstructed yet my inner circle here.
And I
I have
think
dear
it's
friends in like LA, San Francisco, Houston, New York,
but
Vancouver.
it
I've
won't be
got
the and it won't
Ottawa.
be the same, right? It won't be the same inner circle. You won't reconstruct the same people. You could reconstruct your inner circle. It'll have different participants, right? When I was
Exactly.
living overseas, I remember my mentor, who's a really wise guy. He's your age, and he was just on the podcast a few weeks ago. But he talked to me about. He said, "Art, once you've been gone from somewhere 5 years, you can't go back.
You can't go back. It's not
You're
the
going
same.
to. You can go to that city, but you're not moving
I
back."
I remember the moment. It's brilliant. I remember the moment when I was flying from Seattle to Krakow, and I remember halfway across, I had this awareness. I'm going home.
Right? How
I'm
many years in was that, John?
Well, it was 2 or 3 or 4 years, see?
You right?
And I remember when I left the congregation in Ithaca, I remember in my resignation letter that one of the students at Cornell read to the congregation, and we had talked about it with church council and everything, but it was my official resignation. And there was a line in the letter that was so true. I said, "Once again, I find myself leaving home on my way home."
Right.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, and you
that's
know
the
what's
story.
wonderful?
That's the
And see,
story
now
of my
this is what
life.
wonderful. I wanna say good on you again here, but so many people would forget the second part of that sentence,
Yeah.
and then you feel
No.
sad, and it's perfectly appropriate to grieve what you are losing. You are
Yep.
losing, but there's balance by joy
Yep.
of that you're headed to a new home,
Yep.
right? That's really beautiful. Are there any transitions that you need to make, but you're resisting?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I just spent 4 or 5 sessions with a coach slash therapist here because I know because that's what I was and still am in some ways. So I know when the doctor needs to see a doctor kind of thing. I have three existential inquiries, questions dominating me right now. One is who am I when the phone is not ringing? If there's nobody struggling in the water, who am I? Who's John
Mhm.
Scherer when he's just being John? When there's no need calling him? Who am I when I'm not being called to something? To action.
Mhm.
I'm a firefighter sitting around in the fire station, or I'm a lifeguard. There's nobody in the water, or they're all champion swimmers. So who am I? When I'm not doing John,
It's a
who am I?
great question.
Yeah. Second
Had a
question
great
is
conversation on the podcast that came out last week with a lady called Sherry Vasa. If you have time, listen to that.
cool.
That question gets answered by her version for herself,
Cool. Well,
and it was really inspiring to me.
I'm in the process of digesting each of these three questions. I'm working my way. I'm not in a
Yep,
hurry. I want the
absolutely.
questions to have their way with me, is the way I would say it. I want the
Perfect. What
question
are
itself to have its way with me. So the
yeah.
second question is, where do I belong? If I died
Mm,
tomorrow, where would I want my ashes sprinkled? That's some kind of
mm,
question. Where's my soul right now? Right now, want to be?
mm,
And I don't know. So I would probably tell the kids, take some money out of the account and go fly. Here's several places where you need to sprinkle some ashes or something like that. So I don't have a good answer for that one either.
mm,
And the third question is, am I supposed to live out this life alone, or do I have another partner in this final chapter? I have anxiety about all three of those. I mean, I'm uneasy, I'll say. I don't
mhm,
feel like settled about those three.
mhm.
So those are three things that kind of whisper to
And
me.
what do you do with the unsettledness? Are you even if it's uncomfortable and unsettled, are you embracing it or are you still resisting it?
In fact, I'm doing this one of our programs I call Purpose, Power, and Peace. It's a 90-day thing. It's online and stuff like that. And we're on the peace chunk of element now. And I was shooting a couple of videos the other day, and it was about how to be with discomfort. See, one of the things I learned in the military was how to be okay with things that are not okay. You don't get to decide what you're going to eat, what you're going to wear, what you're going to do every day, who's going to be around you. It's exoskeletal. You wake up into that world. It's not negotiable.
Right?
I remember, what if you feel tired? There's no tired in the Navy.
Yeah, you signed
It's
up
like,
for that.
hey,
That's the
Mr.
game you
Scherer,
signed up
the
for.
exactly. I remember one guy saying to Mr. Sheriff, the Navy wanted you to have emotions. We would have trained you how to have them, right? So I learned somewhere along the line, probably before that in my early years, I learned how to be with things not the way I wanted, like mom and pop weren't there. So I learned how to be with things the way they are. And that, I think, is the secret of my longevity, my youthfulness, my health, and whatever success or effectiveness I've had. And that's a
Mhm.
charism that was given to me. I have no idea. I didn't read a book or nobody taught me that. But when I'm
Learning to be
unsettled,
okay with what is,
I could
right?
just be with that because, like in this video that I shot a couple days ago, when I'm upset and I notice that I'm upset, the part of me that's noticing isn't upset.
That's right. That's exactly right. That's the observer is not upset. Yep.
That's what meditation's all about.
Yep. Absolutely.
So I
To
go to
see
that
yourself
place.
sort of in third person, to be
Exactly.
awareness, but
I'm
not
watching
be what
myself
the
be
awareness is looking at.
Yeah, I'm watching myself be scared. And that part of
Yeah.
me that's watching it isn't scared.
Right. Right. Yeah. I noticed that a couple of weeks ago, I was feeling really down in the morning, not sad, but like depressed. Like everything was gray. And it had been that way for a few days. And then when I was doing my emotional check in the morning, I all of a sudden switched to that position
Yeah.
of the third person, right? Like, oh,
Yeah.
look, there's Art having some
Yep.
depressive thoughts again.
Yep.
And then it lifted. I mean, it wasn't near as heavy because it wasn't me. It
Yeah.
was something I was observing, something I was noticing.
Yeah. Yeah. I train my facilitators. Can you be in development about things that you don't think you need to be in development about? Or can you be in development about things that you know you don't need to be in development about? It's like the ability to actually step back, go up in the balcony or go up in the stands and watch yourself in the field,
Right.
in the game.
Yeah. There's so much wisdom in that and so much to unpack in that, right? To make friends with the present moment and then
That's
see
it.
how life shifts, right?
Yeah, I have a friend in Poland, and she and I have been friends now for 5 or 6 years. We're trying to figure out what to do with each other. When she met me, she thought I was in my late 50s, and she found out I was 75. So it's like, oh shit. Pardon me. It's like, oh man. And she's like in her 50s or something like that. And she thought I was in my late 50s. And so it's like, oh man, what a shame. Basically, after a couple of years of hanging out together, and we're just really, really, really dear friends. She said, how have you stayed friends with me? Because she's on TV and everything in Poland. She's relative. The waiters in the restaurant used to want her to autograph the menu and stuff like
Right.
that. And she said, how have you hung in there with me? And I said, well, our friendship drives me into my Zen place. She said, what do you mean? I said, well, expect what you get and enjoy what you have.
There you go. Yep.
So I'm expecting you to be exactly who you are. I'm expecting as best I can our relationship. And I'm just enjoying having lunch here with you. What a fabulous thing going on right now. So
Right.
expect what you
Right.
get, enjoy what you have. And that was something that has been with me for ever since I can remember, the ability
No,
to
that's great. That's great.
be with
I
things the
heard
way
the
they are. Like people have asked me, John, how do you find joy in so many places? I said, because I'm looking for it.
right.
You're going to find what you're looking for. You might as well look for something meaningful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I heard that about expectations this week. They said that expectations are just prearranged resentments.
Isn't that great? Yeah,
right? It's
unmet
just we're
unmet
just setting ourselves
expectations
up
or
like, "Oh, I
resentment.
need
Yep.
something to be a certain way," and then when it's not that way, I'm just setting myself up for resenting
I
later.
learned how to be with things not the way that my mind would want them to be.
Right, but the way they actually are, to be able to
Yeah.
see things in
And
reality, and
and
then to
and
accept.
then enjoy. The verb enjoy means to put joy in. It means to insert joy. So the
Right,
joy isn't in the circumstances that I'm the source of the joy or not.
right.
Right.
That's super interesting because I had this week, I was doing some pretty tough processing, and at one point, even in that super tough process, I switched to play. Like, even in that super heavy stuff, it became playful, and it not only did it feel much better, it also was like the secret superpower to get through that processing, which was really interesting for me. It was a big aha for me to enjoy even something that was heavy, bad, dark, whatever you wanna call it, right? To put
I,
the joy into it, to find the
it's
playfulness, to find
amazing.
not to find the playfulness, to find my playfulness
Absolutely. I
inside of that situation.
I was consulting in the 1980s with a Polaroid back in the Boston area. And this is an assembly line where they were assembling the cameras, mostly middle aged women sitting there doing the same repetitive thing, putting the same screw in the same place. Oh, and I thought, Jesus, Lord help me. If somebody said you have to do that for one day, I would say, just take me out and shoot me right now. Anyway, and I was interviewing them, of course. They're just talking to me while they're doing this. And they said to me, well, let me ask you some questions. One of these women said, can you think about whatever you want to think about all day long? And I went, well, she said, uh-huh. She said, can you talk about whatever you want to talk about all day long? And I went, uh-huh. It was like Cheers. It was like the bar,
Right,
Cheers.
right, yeah,
This was what it was about. This is just what they had to do in order to have their community.
right.
They came
So
to
they were
work every
finding
day,
the
not
joy
to
in
put
that,
that,
yep.
they didn't come to work to put the screw in the camera or whatever. They came to work to hang out with their buddies.
Yeah, and have discussions and so forth, yeah. So I've got 2 questions left for you, John. And we've talked about so much stuff, and you've got a lot of wisdom. I mean, you really do. I see it in doing the LDI workshops. The first question is, if you could share one thing, like if you had one call to action for our listeners today, one thing that you would really recommend. And I know you have a lot of stuff going on, but that's why the challenge of this question is to think about like because it's much better to do one thing than to think about 10. So if there is one thing that's simple, that's a tool that you feel like that people could really benefit that are going through transition. And we've talked about a lot of things. Maybe it's one of those, maybe something else comes to your mind right now. What gift would you give to those
That's
that
a
are
hard
swimming
one.
out in rough water?
That's the hardest thing anybody's asked me in a long time, Art. And I'm going to give a quick answer, quicker than I would want.
Good,
But
because
this,
often that's coming
yeah,
from a higher place.
this is what's coming to me. It's to hold on to the thought that it's okay, whatever's happening. I'm
Mm.
okay. You're okay. We're okay.
And it's
Life is
okay.
okay. And it's going to be okay. And it's always okay. That there's some kind of I don't want to say perfection because that takes it down the wrong road, but there's some kind of okayness about the way things are. If we could, in hindsight, we will see how it was okay what we did on this call.
Right, right.
Like we can't see it in the moment. We live our life not knowing if we stay in the moment, but we understand it. Look, we understand it backwards. So
Right,
that's what
but
I would
to
want.
bring that backwards into the instead of "Igbok," instead of "It's going to be okay,"
It's okay.
it is okay. Like,
It
right
is
now, whatever
okay.
it is, that's
Yeah.
I wanna sit in that for a
Life is
minute
going to be
because
a continuous series of okay moments inside of which in that moment we had absolutely every, like right now in this moment with you in this nanosecond everything that I need or that you need or that the world needs is happening right now. It can't
Yep,
happen any other time. There
right,
is no other
right,
time. It's
yeah,
already something that happened a nanosecond ago. And if I think about the future, it's anxiety, which isn't happening now anyway.
right,
So it's to
right,
return to the now, all the spiritual
and to
teachings talk.
accept and to know and to have that presence that it's okay. Whatever it is, it's okay.
There's so many sayings from my first book was on the parables of Jesus. And he says, the kingdom, the world, the way I understand it and live it is at hand. It's right now.
Right, that's right.
The
Yeah.
kingdom, he called it.
Yeah, and I've been listening to Anthony Melello recently,
Oh yeah,
Awareness,
Tony,
and he talks
Tony, what
about,
a
like,
guy.
when people talk about eternal life, it's
Yeah.
not like the way
No,
we
it's
think
not
about, like,
linear.
from
It's
alpha
not
to omega,
linear.
the eternal now,
It's
because there's only the
depth.
now.
It's deep now rather
Yeah,
than
and
it's
that's
rather than
eternal because this moment is all there
that's it.
is this
Absolutely.
moment.
Yeah.
No, and I think intellectually it's easy to accept, but I think your tool of whatever is in the now is also okay.
Yeah.
I think that's really and that's something everybody can,
Even though I
can
can't see it, it's okay. And it's even okay that I can't see it. See, that's the
that's right.
radical depth of my
Yep.
faith.
Yeah. No, that's wonderful. I really appreciate it. So last
And what's
question,
the
John.
second? What's that? I'm
Now,
holding
this
my
one's
breath.
easy, but I say it's easy, but I really where can listeners find out about you? I mean, you're such
Oh,
an interesting guy. You've got a lot of stuff going on.
sure.
Where can you point our listeners to a few books, to a few websites or podcasts or whatever? Where can listeners find out more about you?
Well, my book is on Kindle. My most recent book is called Facing the Tiger. That's on Kindle, and there's an interactive version as well. But if you go to wiseratwork.com,
That's your primary website. That'll
wiseratwork.com,
have links to all your books
that'll have
and
links to whatever's going on, all the workshops and seminars and stuff that we're doing.
okay.
And that's my new business venture that started. I started it 15 years ago, 16 years, and then I moved to Poland, had to put it on hold. So I'm now resurrecting, so to speak, with a colleague where we formed this. I formed a business at 82 years old. I'm in a startup mode.
There you go. There you go. Any other places where people can follow you, or is that the best place? Are you active
That's
on
the best
LinkedIn or
place
any
to
social
go. I
medias
mean,
or
yeah, I don't want to be overwhelmed with emails and stuff like that because I just don't have the bandwidth and I don't have a team here to handle all that. So,
right?
yeah, wiseratwork.com is probably the best bet. And you can go on to, I'm on like LinkedIn and stuff like, I think I'm on Facebook, but I hardly go there.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not
I
on there
don't
a
have,
lot, but
I just
I'm
don't have the time to
right.
do it, or I don't
Right.
take the
No,
time
well,
to do it. Yeah.
John, it's really interesting. And I appreciate the wisdom. I appreciate the energy and the enthusiasm and vibrancy that you bring to life at 83 years young, even with your arm
Thank you.
around death every day.
Yeah.
It's been really enlightening for me. And I'm really curious and love to learn. So thank you so much for
Thank you, Art.
spending time with us today.
I'm going to be sending this link to everybody in my little network. So you're going to be out there too, man.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate it, John. All the
Roger
best.
that.
I can't wait to hear what action you are taking. Connect with me on LinkedIn or our website, lifeintransition.online, and let me know. Let a friend know too. It could be a huge encouragement to them and keep you on the track. Thank you so much for joining me today. Make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and it would mean a lot to me if you left a review and shared this episode with a friend. If you want to learn more about me and what I do when I'm not podcasting, please visit me at artblanchford.com. Thank you for listening. Together, let's make the most of life in transition.